Hello everybody, Rowan Lytle from Into Fly Fishing here. Today we're going to be doing another reel review. We're going to take a look at the Lamson Litespeed G5, which I have right here. This is the -11 Plus model. It's the largest size. I bought this in store for a little bit over $300. Now, for the beginner, that's a pretty expensive reel. You might want to look at something like the Lamson Liquid that I just recently reviewed as well. However, for those looking for something a little bit higher quality, this is a good reel to take a look at. I bought this version to put on a 12-weight rod, and I'm looking to use this for things like tarpon, mid to small sized blue water species, and big striped bass, stuff like that. It can also be pretty appropriate for things like muskie or pike, although really in that sort of fishing scenario you don't need that good a reel, but it's a good size reel and will balance a rod well. Now, unlike the Liquid, which is a die cast and then slightly machined reel, the Lightspeed is a fully machined aluminum fly reel. Now, since it's aluminum, it's relatively corrosion resistant. This is a pretty decent reel to use in salt water. Of course, if water does get into the drag system, you could have some problems, but it is reasonably well sealed. Now, the spool itself in particular is very light. It's very hollowed out, as you can see. That means this is a pretty light reel, and it balances really well on most rods. Though it's pretty hollowed out, it isn't especially breakable. You're not that likely to bend or break this reel. Of course, I wouldn't go slamming it around, dropping it on rocks and things like that, but this can take quite a bit of abuse. Now, another advantage of this reel is it has a very good drag system. It's almost the same drag system as the Liquid. Of course, that's the same drag system that Lamson uses on a lot of their higher end reels. So it's pretty darn good. It's very strong. I have it set to one of its higher settings here, and it takes quite a bit of force to actually pull line out when it's like this. That means you could use this reel for really big fish around cover and not have to worry too much about those fish peeling line and going into that cover and breaking you off. This is a decent reel that you can use to stop a big fish in a scenario like that. There's also minimal drag tension whenever you start pulling line out of this reel. It's called startup tension. And whenever you're fishing with a lighter tippet for large fish like steelhead, salmon, or carp, that's an excellent thing. That means that when a fish takes a run and you have your drag set relatively low, it won't take that much tension to start pulling line out. It'll take almost exactly the same amount of tension that it does when the drag is already spinning. That's important. That means fish won't just break you off as soon as they go to make a run. That means you'll have more than just the rod itself as tippet protection. You can use the drag of this reel and reasonably expect that you won't have big fish break off on light line if you're doing things correctly. Now, the Lightspeed also has a quite narrow spool, as you can see. That's really good for line handling. That means whenever you're reeling in, you don't need to pay all that much attention to where the line is going. As long as you're keeping some check on it, it's not going to pile up too much one side or the other, and it's not going to overlap a whole lot. Of course, I have it on a little bit messy here, but that's entirely because I've been fooling around with it here in the shop. Now, the spool also has a really wide diameter, and that means this reel has a great retrieve rate. If you have it spooled correctly with a good amount of backing and just enough fly line that it fits underneath the reel foot, then you are all set. This reel is going to retrieve at a pretty high rate for you. That's excellent, because fly reels, of course, have a 1-to-1 retrieve ratio. It doesn't have a gear ratio like a spinning or conventional reel where one turn of the handle pulls in more line. So that high diameter means that you're going to be able to pull in a good amount of line, and if a fish is running at you or something like that and you need to reel quickly, you'll pick up line faster than you would with some other fly reels. Now, the Lamson Litespeed G5 is pretty darn useful for a wide variety of species. The smallest sizes are very appropriate for things like small mountain trout, for panfish, for bass, things like that. The mid-range sizes are good for larger bass, for larger trout, even for some warm water things like small carp, even smaller saltwater species like bonefish. Now, the largest size, which I have right here, the -11 Plus, would be fairly appropriate for big striped bass, tarpon, even small to mid-range blue water fish. I think this would even be an appropriate reel for something like a small bluefin tuna. It has the line capacity and the drag to handle a fish like that pretty respectfully. Now, of course, the Saltwater Seal on this reel isn't as good as it could be. And there's a newer version of the Lightspeed M, that is fully sealed and considered waterproof. Now, that reel costs quite a bit more and isn't as available in as wide a range of sizes. However, if you're looking for something for big saltwater fish and just a lot of use in the salt, that reel is probably something you should look at. Of course, if you can't afford that, this reel is very appropriate. However, I wouldn't go fully submerging it in the water and really beating it up. That's just not a good idea. You're not going to get as much life out of your reel if you treat it that way. Now, one of the issues I had with the Lamson Liquid was the reel handle. I felt that that was a little bit small and too smooth, and it didn't have a good shape to it. It was just too easy to slip off. And when I'm using a reel like this for bigger fish, I want a reel that I can reliably crank and I'm not going to lose my grip on it. Now, I think the handle on the Lightspeed is a little bit better than the handle on the Liquid. Although it doesn't have any more grip on it, it's shaped a bit differently, so you're less likely to slide off. It's also a little bit larger. So I don't have a lot of problems with the handle on this reel. I think it's very comfortable and perfectly useful. However, I'm not a huge fan of the drag knob. I think that it's set a little bit too tight to the spool. You don't have a ton of grip on it. It is relatively easy to change the drag setting. However, I think that could be improved just a little bit. Of course, its size and the fact that it's set in and it's hollowed out in here means that it is light and it doesn't really add to the weight of the reel a lot, and that is a bit of a plus. Now, spool removal on the Lamson Litespeed G5 is identical to that of the Liquid, and by that I mean you simply pull the spool off. There's no button to hit, there's nothing like that. That can be a little bit annoying at times. It takes more force than I'd like some of the time, especially when it's cold. The lubricant gets a little bit thicker and the metals expand and contract in the cold and in different temperatures, and that can mean it's more difficult to pull the spool off the reel. However, it's not usually so difficult that it's impossible. When you're putting the spool back on, be careful to make sure your line's not such a mess that it gets stuck between the spool and the reel foot, because you could damage your line doing that. And simply putting back the spool means pushing it down until you hear a click and it's on there and it's not just going to fall off. This isn't the worst way that a spool can be removed and put back on. There's not really any opportunity for the spool to simply plop off into the river while you're on the water fishing, unlike some reels which have a little button or switch or something like that. So, though it's not my favorite way to have a spool come on and off the reel, it's not the worst either, and it does have some benefits. Now, like we said, the price range of the Lamson Litespeed G5 is a little bit high for beginners. This isn't a great reel to buy if you're just starting out. It's gonna really cost you. Of course, if you're looking for something of good quality, this is a reasonably affordable reel. It's not extremely expensive. There are certainly costlier reels on the market of about the same quality. In stores, it might cost you a little bit more. Of course, you can get it lined up with backing and fly line there, and that's a big plus as well. I mean, the line capacity on this reel is also excellent. I put a ton of Spectra backing on this. I have about 400 yards of backing on this reel. Of course, that cost me quite a bit, but I think it's worth it in the long run. This is definitely a reel that's more appropriate for well-experienced fly fishermen that are looking for a good quality reel. This is actually one of my favorite reels in my lineup. It might be my favorite. I haven't really gotten the chance to use it for the type of fish that I bought it for yet. I have not put a tarpon on this thing yet, but I'm going to. It's gonna happen, and I'm confident that it's gonna hold up in those situations. It's a tough, durable, good quality reel with a great drag, and it is worth the money, that's for sure. Now, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope this has been a helpful review. Take a look down in the description below for a link to the article that I wrote about this reel. Feel free to comment, like, and subscribe. Tight lines, everybody. Have a good one.